Hello, this is Dmitry Babich on Pravda.ru, and this is our traditional program Viewpoint, where we hear the opinions of interesting people. My guest today is Joshua Tartakovsky, an international writer and journalist based in the United States. He recently visited Donbass, he also visited Serbia, he wrote on a number of topics, and our first question to Mr. Tartakovsky is the following. What was something that Serbia, Donbass, and other places that you visited recently, the places like Venezuela, what did they have in common? Am I right that in each of these places you had the West basically pressuring the local governments into doing something they don't want to do?
Yes, actually I haven't been in Serbia for a few years, but my impression from both Serbia, Donbass, and Venezuela, it comes from two aspects. There are two ways you can look at it, both from the government side and from the people side. Mm-hmm. From the government side, we're living in an unfortunate period where the United States is seeking total global hegemony, and it's seeking to remove any obstacle to that, and it's targeting any government it dislikes for economic reason, whether by color revolutions or by outright war. The people in Donbass are faced with an outright aggression by ultra-fascist military units which are bombing civilians lying just a few kilometers away from the city. Venezuela is faced more with an economic war, not of a military nature, but economic sanctions and speculation against the currency due to the fact that the oligarchs within Venezuela are supported by Washington.
And also maybe media aggression. There is a lot of media in Venezuela, just like there was a lot of media in Ukraine that was financed from outside, and that was a part of the aggression. Am I right?
Yes, even from within, because basically the interests of the oligarchs, of the local elite, and the interests of Washington are the same, to privatize everything, to sell off the state's resources. And another country where I've actually lived for quite some time, almost 3 years, which is directly related to that, is Brazil. Mm-hmm. Where the media has been brainwashing, has been engaging in an aggressive campaign which is entirely inaccurate, the O Globo conglomerate especially, against the sitting president, Dilma Rousseff, demanding her impeachment without any legitimate grounds because she didn't commit a crime or didn't commit any violation. So going back, there's actually a convergence of interests because between the local powerful elite and Washington, with the local elite not having the interests of the country in mind, really, of the people in mind. And then if we go to Serbia, then also obviously they faced a very brutal NATO bombing, and now they're facing a lot of pressure from the EU to join, although it would actually hurt their economy. But if we look at Serbia, Venezuela, and Donbass, then on the one hand, the various governments are facing intense pressure. On the other hand, I would say that the people themselves in all these three countries have far more communal values and are less individualistic and seek to still have common goods. They still want to have public parks. They still want to have some kind of a wider community, a society, to be part of something greater than just an individual, while the EU and the US are trying to basically force on them a Germanic vision of individualist vision, which will basically cause a society to collapse or privatize everything, will result in growing poverty among most. And that's basically, it's a clash as well between two different cultures.
Well, I have been thinking about it for a long time. It is now clear that the US is out for total world domination. And that domination is destructive because in human history, whenever a single country or a single individual tried to control the whole world, that individual brought to ruin his own country and whole continents. Like Hitler tried to dominate the world, Napoleon Bonaparte tried to dominate the world, Alexander the Great tried to dominate the world, and they all failed. And these favors cost very dearly to mankind. Do you think that the elites in big countries such as Russia and Brazil, the countries that you have seen, do you think that the elites realize that the danger will not go away, that the United States will continue pressing for their removal, and that it's time to mobilize, unite, and maybe they can survive that way? Or do they want to just stay aside and avoid the danger on their own?
I think they're blinded by a short-term vision. They have a short-term perspective, short-term profit, short-term interest, and they're blinded by the larger picture. If we look at the UK, for example, you had many people supporting privatizations of Lady Thatcher. And then actually, with the same logic which worked on the small scale of allowing corporations to take over privatizing the economy and allowing companies to have a greater say in the market, eventually resulted in even larger corporations, as the size of the EU and even larger, eventually taking over the UK. And now the UK itself is a much smaller player within a much broader framework, and it can't really leave it that easily. Remains to be seen whether it could even leave it. So basically, the same logic which serves the interest in the beginning, if like certain elites join the neoliberal consensus, the Washington consensus, there's no guarantee it will survive. And why is that so? Because basically, we're in a situation today now which actually is a bit disturbing, because we're in a much more dangerous situation in a way than what we had with Alexander the Great or Rome. Because right now we have we're in a financial world where everything is measured by money, not by. You can't really escape it. You can't really survive without money.
Not even by arms, but by money.
Exactly. And what does that mean? It means we're in a situation where the way the market has been allowed to run, where there's no controls at all, it creates immense monopolies. And when it creates immense monopolies, these monopolies have a total control. And they even transcend the nation state, and they can hold within their grasp several continents, the Europe and the United States, Europe and Northern America.
Maybe this is the reason why there are fewer and fewer famous journalists now in the world, because you have, in order to survive financially, the media has to be a part of these huge monopolies, and they dictate their will in a much stricter way than even the Soviet government dictated it. So a journalist is no longer a free person, a free writer, finding his themes and voicing his opinions, his or her opinions. Now a journalist is just that small worker in a big company, sitting at his computer, typing something, then going on missions, filming something, and basically expressing the viewpoints that the boss wants him to express. And do you manage to avoid becoming such a journalist? How do you manage to do it?
Well, let's look at the United States, for example. You have 90% of the media is owned by 6 corporations. And nowadays, in almost every news organization, in the mainstream, in all the corporate news organizations, there's a sense of reporters trying to seek to please the writers, and there's a certain, even unmentioned rules on what people should cover on and not, but it's pretty obvious. The norms are obvious, even though they don't even need to be written. But besides the obvious guidelines and suggestions from editors, but there's basic norms of within the liberal discourse, as it were, which is really the liberal imperialist discourse, what can be discussed and what should not even be covered. But furthermore, what we see is also a sense of, for example, in Washington Times or the Washington Post or the New York Times, especially the Washington Post, they form such close relationships with the government, and they seek to get new scoops and new stories from them, that they write articles that would be pleasing for members of the government. And therefore, they're no longer guardians of democracy. Personally, I managed to survive in different ways, but generally I would say it's nearly impossible now for many independent journalists. On the other hand, the good news is that more and more Americans are getting using social media as the main source for alternative news or for news in general. And that gives us a lot more power nowadays, because more people look more for different sources, more of a diverse group of sources, instead of just, and actually less. And they also have, I think, confidence in the mainstream corporate media, and especially TV, is at an all-time low, because after so many different incidents, people put one and one together, and they see that it's they're more skeptical.
Well, the social media has its good sides and it has its defects. Usually social media tends to be more emotional and less like comprehensive than the mainstream media. And the mainstream media is usually, holds social media in contempt. They say that these are not professionals, we are professionals, we know how to film, we know how to interview people. We always present 2 sides of the story. But, this thought sometimes comes to me. In the 30s, when Hitler was starting his conquests in Europe, if you read the Western mainstream press of the day, these were pretty wishy-washy reports, like a nationalist leader of Germany, Adolf Hitler, chancellor, controversial person. And the Soviet propaganda, the Soviet propaganda said very openly, this is the murkiest kind of reaction in Europe. Hitler is bringing Europe back to the Middle Ages. They were saying it in 1934, in 1935. And I caught myself asking myself that question, who was closer to the truth at the time? And strangely, it was the Soviet propaganda. The emotional Soviet propaganda was right, and the professional Western media was wrong. So don't you think that right now, if you filter out, you know, the racist element from the social media, the emotional element, I mean the badly emotional element, then the social media is now telling the truth, not the mainstream media.
Well, actually, unfortunately, we're in a situation now where I just came back from the United States. I was just in Philadelphia. I was watching I got an opportunity to watch different TV channels, which otherwise I wouldn't, and hours and hours and hours. And also reading different magazines and newspapers and publications to a much greater extent. And what I saw was that actually, in a way, besides the fact that the TV works exactly the way social media works, which means from one news item to another without really a thorough analysis, and therefore people just jump from a headline to another without really becoming too introspective about it. In fact, the version we're provided on TVs is extremely simplistic and is not accurate at all. And it's just not accurate. But it's just being repeated over and over again. So it's not even news, it's really propaganda, because they take certain elements which fit a certain narrative and they just keep repeating them. Now, if we look at even the more analytical publications which I was looking at, they would keep repeating again a simplified story, which is like the U.S. is a democracy, all other countries are other countries that oppose the U.S. are dictatorships. We're like the sons of the light, as it were. But in fact, there's an incredible democratic deficit at the moment in the U.S. There are various incidents for that. But again, going back to history, if we go back to World War II, as you said, the whole notion that a person can be entirely objective on every issue and be impartial just is not true, because that's a certain outcome of a philosophical mindset, post-enlightenment of the rational man who's a scientist. That may be true for science, but when it comes to humanity, when it comes to human events, people obviously take a side. Meaning, if you see an injustice taking place or a massacre or bombing of civilians, it would obviously be wrong to present both sides as equal or to speak in a very impartial voice, because it's only human to get involved, to have an emotion on the issue and to be concerned about it. And that's what we're seeing with social media today. More and more people are getting more curious about what's happening in different parts of the world. And they finally have an ability to bring images from different parts of the world directly on and for people to see and understand. And we didn't have that before. So we have a window of opportunity which is slowly opening up. The problem is, as a result of this, I would say the mainstream corporate media is becoming extremely narrow-minded and extremely partial more than ever before. So they're moving to an extreme, trying to counter the fact that people are being given...
Well, I can give you an example. In the Soviet times, you did not have Western media blasting the Soviet propaganda machine or particular media outlets in the Soviet Union which broadcast to the Western audiences. The Western audience and the Western media did not care. And now this amount of hatred for RT, for radio stations like Sputnik. Why is there this hatred? You know, propaganda bullhorns, Putin's mouthpieces, you know, let them be destroyed, let them be strangled financially, take their money away from them. I wonder where this hatred comes from. And the hatred comes from this inability to hear any criticism. The Western media knows that it is lying. So when you are a liar and there is suddenly a person or a media outlet which is exposing your lies, maybe not for the best of reasons, but exposing it, you want to silence it, you want to destroy it. And in that sense, I was recently stunned by the statement of the former Deputy Secretary of State of the United States, Mike Kramer. He directly advised on the pages of the New York Times, he directly advised the US government to freeze the accounts of RT in America because the court in Holland ruled in favor of compensating the former owners of Yukos oil company. So do you think that this hatred for the Russian media, do you think that it comes from the fact that the modern mainstream Western media just doesn't tolerate competition, doesn't tolerate dissent?
Well, it really doesn't make sense based on the democratic values in which the U.S. was founded, because if we're supposed to have freedom of speech and Americans really would like to have more information, one of the basic concepts behind the United States is that people like to have a variety of choices and to choose from. So why must the U.S. block off certain media not to their liking? Why are they afraid of a different view? So clearly there's a few elements here. First of all, from this, it's only obvious that the U.S. mainstream media is showing a very inaccurate perspective, and it's the distance from their version and from reality is so extreme that they have to block out any competition. But then it goes deeper than that. They're working to demonize Russia and now also China, not just for the sake of, I don't think people need to take it personally as if they hate us, as if, oh no, like they hate us, why do they hate us, what did we do wrong? Because the point of view is actually very cynical. The financial interest or the US government is trying to isolate and take over any kind of alternative economic structure. Entity. Yeah. That's the ultimate motivation. Now, at least one of them. So what's the best way to do that? To convince the American people, to convince the viewers that they're superior, that they're they're the enlightened ones, they're the on the good
free
side.
Ones, yeah.
They're the free ones. And that way they give them a sense as if they're part of this holy crusade, as it were, against the barbarians, even like a jihad in a certain way. But why does that help them? Because although the American people actually will not benefit financially from a war with Russia or with China or with Iran.
Or they don't benefit financially from a takeover of the Russian economy or of the Chinese economy by the huge US corporations.
Exactly.
The American consumer would lose.
Exactly. Exactly. And they still try to give them the illusion. And the problem is that so many people buy into that. I would say less and less, but the problem is that the ones who buy into it are diehards, and they're usually liberals, meaning they truly think that they're superior, that they have these human rights and other countries don't have them. I've traveled around the world quite a bit. I've seen various people who are very happy in very different circumstances and have very rich
various kinds
forms.
of media, you know. For example, in Venezuela or in Russia, you have been here. Don't you think that there is pluralism in the media here, and probably even more pluralism than in the United States? Because in the United States, basically, if you compare the New York Times and the Washington Post, you get the same messages and the same images of countries, just in different packages. There is a conservative package, there is a liberal package, but actually Putin is supposed to be a villain. Václav Havel is supposed to be a saint, although he wasn't. So tell me, please, in Venezuela, is there a variety of views expressed in the press? And in Russia, what's your impression about the variety of views?
Yes, of course. I mean, in Venezuela, there are major TV networks which constantly broadcast against the government of Venezuela, against the democratic government of Venezuela, constantly brainwashing people and misrepresenting what is going on. In Russia, you have various media speaking against the president, against the Russian government. They dislike this or that action. Every other day they're complaining about a new step that the government takes, the democratic government of the country. Same in Brazil. And basically, in Russia, as well as in Venezuela, as I've seen myself, people say all different kind of things about the president. They may be very unhappy with different things, and they voice it quite vocally and without any kind of inhibition.
And without any fear.
And without any fear. And they even go to use swear words. They would curse, right? Now, do we see that happening in the US? Would people use swear words about a president? No. Would people speak out vocally against the president? And would a mainstream person speak so? No, because it's not really politically correct, and it's beyond the limits of what's acceptable to criticize the President Obama. So in the US, the politically correct norm is really hegemony. And it really resides in people's minds, and it's that strong that people actually there's what's acceptable and unacceptable in discourse, even among friends, and especially in the work environment.
Yeah.
So that means that there's really people are really censor themselves in terms of what they would say about the president. Not in Russia, not in Venezuela.
But I noticed that in the United States, people are sometimes critical of the president as a person. They accuse Obama of being a weakling, not killing enough people, obviously. But they don't criticize policies. There is no question that U.S. should promote democracy all over the world, even though promotion of democracy means wars sometimes. There is no argument that we are more civilized than Russia, and we are more democratic than Venezuela, although that is highly questionable. So there is no discussion about the policies. The people have a choice of persons, but they don't have a choice of policies. And the same thing, the same system is installed by the United States in some of the former Soviet republics. In Ukraine, in Georgia. Okay, in Georgia, people were fed up with Mikhail Saakashvili. They voted him out of power. And the United States said, okay, if the policy stays the same, if there is still an anti-Russian regime in place, okay, let another person head it. The same thing in Ukraine. Even if Yatsenyuk, the bloody prime minister who masterminded the attack against Donbass, even though he was ousted with shame just recently, still there is still the same President Poroshenko, there is his crony as the prime minister, and the same policy will continue. So am I right that you can change person, but you can't change the policies in that system?
I would say there are certain dogmas which people hold onto in the U.S. which are deeply ingrained in people from a very young age, that the U.S. is the most advanced society in the world, and that the Americans only mean well. They only want to bring democracy, and other societies, other countries are complete dictatorships, and only Americans are happy. That's entirely untrue. You can go to Venezuela, you can go to Cuba, you can go and talk to people and see how people enjoy very close, friendly human relations and have a joy of life, and even in some cases have much better healthcare than many Americans. Far more advanced healthcare. Americans pay an incredible amount for healthcare in a much lower quality, and many Americans can't even afford healthcare nowadays. So the sense of superiority is so strong that people don't even question it. And the truth is, the only way people could really find out an alternative is by traveling, but a lot of Americans don't travel, and a lot of Americans are suffering from the economic crisis in general, and many are unemployed. You have about 10% actual unemployment, although officially it's 5%, it doesn't count the real figures. So Americans are not really aware that much that the situation is far more complex than they're being told by the media, and ever since they went to kindergarten. And again, they adhere to the notion that that they have the perfect democracy and they need to bring democracy to the world. Well, in fact, first of all, they don't really have democracy, because we saw how the government is spying on their own citizens, and and alternative media cannot really succeed in the U.S. It's very difficult to get funding. And secondly, we've seen more and more of police cracking down on any kind of demonstration because of the economic crisis. Just a few weeks ago, 500 protesters were arrested in Washington protesting about the economic situation. The American media, the mainstream media like CNN, didn't even cover it. Maybe they gave it a few seconds. So I would say that my impression is this, that by and large there's this consensus of Americans as being democracy and so on. But there's a growing number of Americans who are becoming very disillusioned with the system, because they see that the American dream is dead. It's no longer alive. The middle class is declining. Gaps are growing, and poverty is increasing, and there's growing homelessness and a lot of defaults, and a lot of people are struggling to make a living, and although they're shameful to admit it, it's becoming a daily reality. So therefore, we see more and more anger. That's why we see greater support for Donald Trump on the one hand and Bernie Sanders on the other hand. So I think there's a chance now, there's an opening to educate more Americans about the reality around the world, so they won't be as gullible in believing that the government wants to bring democracy, because already they can see the result in Iraq and Libya. The result was catastrophic. The U.S. put in power terrorists in Libya, and now in Syria they want to do the same thing. They empowered them and they allowed them to take over. So I think more and more Americans are realizing it. So I think actually the liberal imperialists, as it were, the middle class people like the New York Times readers who think that the U.S. has a superiority, they're actually declining in number. They're very vocal, they're very outspoken, they're fanatics, they're fundamentalists. The only way they will learn is, I'm afraid, the hard way. It's really impossible to argue with them because they're dogmatic. But I think their numbers are actually declining. And now we need to reach the unaffiliated Americans who are being marginalized, and the number is growing because rural America, people don't have jobs, and we need to influence them.
But in general, what's your prognosis? I mean, we now see very clearly that the US wants to control the financial flows. All the banks around the world have to report about their investors to the United States. If you don't do it, you will be excluded from the system of international exchange. But this is a system that you described it, it doesn't bring happiness to the majority of people, so it is not sustainable. And probably the elites of Russia, China, India, Brazil, the big countries, the big economies, maybe they can realize that the danger is there and they can unite in order to resist the danger. What's your prognosis? Are you more optimistic or pessimistic about the chances of US hegemony around the world?
I think it won't come to pass. I think Russia will be pushing the BRICS to not allow it to come to pass. Russia and China will be at the forefront, and hopefully other countries will remain steadfast and will join. I think there's a growing number of people within these countries which sees it, but I think Russia especially is leading this effort. And the reason I think it won't come to pass is because the Russian people have within them a certain unwillingness to become serfs, to become slaves to the United States. And basically what we're seeing around the world is more and more countries being destroyed by war for the sake of profit, so-called democracy. And the truth is that the American model won't provide prosperity for the people under which it wants to put under its umbrella. There are many false promises being given and many different positive images people have of the United States. But if we look at the reality of different countries once they joined, let's look at Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is defaulting now. And there's immense poverty. Now many Puerto Ricans are moving to the US to get jobs, but they actually won't find jobs there because there are less and less jobs. In the last few years, more Mexicans left the United States than came into the United States. Can you imagine? More Mexicans leaving back to Mexico because there are less and less jobs there for most people. So basically, I think that the American model, what they do have in their hand, in their favor, is propaganda. They have the media like CNN, New York Times. It's a very glossy, nice image of a magazine cover. When you look inside, when you visit the United States, when you see poverty, which is in all the big cities, you see poverty, you see homelessness, you see people sleeping inside banks. Then you realize the situation is much more complex and the media is giving people a fantasy, which is an unrealistic one. So I don't believe this plan for global hegemony will come to pass because I believe people are starting to wake up within various countries more and more. I think we need to work much harder, but I think they're working to expose it. Personally, you're working very hard, but I'm talking about myself. And I think more and more people are becoming aware, and I don't think Russians will let it happen because I think deep inside Russians will realize, and I think people are realizing it more and more, because I believe that the United States wants the total surrender of Russia and China and these countries. They want nothing else. So I don't believe most people here will allow it to happen. Maybe some elites in different countries would want that to happen, but the people will not allow it to happen.
Well, that's my impression about the elite in China and especially in India, that the elites are much more pro-Western than the general population. And this despite the fact that these are elites which have been demonized by the American media. I even noticed that some members of the elite in Russia or in India, they became sort of immune to demonization. They don't get insulted when the American media goes after them really badly, like the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. You know, the way the New York Times insulted him was terrible, but he is sort of used to it, so he takes it with a grain of salt. But the example of Ukraine shows that the danger is real, and if these people from the West, if they are after you, they won't stop at having you killed. You know, I think that was the unpleasant surprise for Mr. Yanukovych. The people who said hello to him and shook hands and gave presents during the summits, you know, including his last summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, these same people were ready to see him dead if he stayed in Kiev and tried to perform his duties of the president. Because the Maidan crowd would have killed him, there's no doubt about it. So I think the weak link in this chain of defense of the people, it's not the poor people in India, in Russia, or in China. It's the elite that is the weak link, you know. The elite may betray at any moment, exposing the country and their countrymen to the Western onslaught. Is that your impression also?
Yes, I agree. I think the people are, yes, but I think there are two aspects. The first point is I think the elite is a lot more confident now in the developing worlds, China and India. they're far more confident than they were. Actually, I would say in a way that the elite in India and China may even be more confident than some of the Russian elite. I would say some of the Russian elite has this fantasy of being part of the West, or is extremely westernized in its view outlook, and it has this inferiority. It has this inferiority complex.
And the ethnically Russia is closer to the West, so
Exactly.
it's easier for these people to imagine themselves as part of the West.
Exactly. That's
Indian,
exactly. Exactly.
Chinese elite.
And I think,
but it's an illusion. This closeness, ethnic closeness, it's only illusionary, because the real interests of the Western elite, their real fanaticism, if you want, is so strong. They're prepared to see these people killed. I mean, we almost have religious wars now. In the United States, if you are against what they call democracy, if you are against their candidate, then you can be killed with impunity. You have seen it in Donbass, you know. Thousands of people killed with impunity. For what reason? You know, why is there no trial in the West against Mr. Poroshenko? Why are there no accusations against him? Precisely because he was killing the people who opposed the American candidate to rule them. And that immediately put these people out of law in the eyes of the Western media, in the eyes of the Western courts, in the eyes of the Western states in general. So basically, I think the Russian media, the Russian elite is deluding itself when it thinks that it can stay out of the trouble by accommodating the West.
for certain, I think the Russian elite needs to realize that the Russian elite still comes from Russia, which the Russia today, modern Russia, has two different legacies, at least two. Both traditional values of Orthodox Christianity and the communist legacy of the Soviet Union. And in both of them, a person's word and friendship carry a certain value, meaning even if economic conditions are not easy, people's friendships remain.
Yes.
In the West, that's not the case. In the United States, the bottom line is the way the elites their work is that, first of all, we can't take their word seriously. If you can, as obviously we know historically how U.S. Secretary of State Baker promised Gorbachev that NATO will not expand. That didn't happen. But basically, you can't take the word. One day they say this, the other day they say that. Especially, I'm speaking of not of the American people, but of the American elite.
Elite, yeah.
And secondly, they'll be betrayed next. And it's very simple. You betray your people today, you will be betrayed by the people tomorrow. And they don't need to agree with me or accept what I say. Just look at history, at the elites of every country throughout history, and see what happened to them. It's just like colonized countries which had their elites and they were eventually betrayed. It's just happening in a bigger scale now.
Yeah.
So, so I would say there are 2 points. First of all, they would lose their status, and secondly, they would be taken over eventually. Why? Because ultimately, at some point, the U.S. or the industries will overrun their local industries or their source of revenue eventually, and they'll be swallowed up. And we've seen that process everywhere. We saw how the EU expanded; it swallowed up all the local industries in various countries.
Well, I think you are right, and unfortunately, the examples of many countries show that you are right. There is no such thing, for example, today as Hungarian industry. There is almost no such thing as the Polish industry. There is no such thing as the Latvian agriculture, because these branches of these countries' economies were simply destroyed, swallowed by the foreign buyers. And this is a sad but still an important note, and let me remind our listeners that still you believe that American hegemony won't pass. That was our main conclusion. And I think this is the right time to bring our conversation to the end. Let me remind our viewers that we have been talking, my name is Dmitry Babich, and my interlocutor was Joshua Tartakovsky, a US-based international journalist, writer, and we have been talking about the dangers of globalization and dangers of recent changes in our fast-changing world. Thank you. Please watch Pravda.ru. Find us on the internet. Goodbye from me, Dmitry Babich, from now.